thank you so much. Couple of quick things before we get started. Just a massive thank you to David and the brand finance team for inviting me to come along and say a few words. It struck me actually that this reopening and new beginnings is such a lovely thing, because I'm quite hopeful, and we've already started some of that potentially we might be able to collaborate on things, I think, where the quant and the data and the research depth of experience and knowledge you have connects with some of the kind of creative, strategic and qualitative side of things that we work on as well. So I know we share a certain kind of connection in terms of the clients and so on, and ambitions. So yeah, just thank you again, appreciate. And thanks to Zoe, Georgia, everyone who's helped to kind of organise as well. I know these things aren't easy. So thank you for that. My name's Doug Hewett. I'm one of the co-founders of PeopleMade. I'm going to share about 15-20 minutes worth of content. I hope that's okay. Pull together a few different aspects of their employer brand. I'm going to try and make an argument to widen your perspective on employer brand, to think about culture and to think about how culture drives employer brand and the different aspects of it. So I know the index, and I had a really good look at its wonderful stuff. There are a number of things in there that at the end I'll touch on, and perhaps when we do our kind of 10 minutes Q&A we can discuss some of them in a bit more detail. So yeah, with your permission, we'll go into that. Well, let me get into a few things. Introducing PeopleMade first of all. We're based just up the road in Shoreditch in an old tea factory. There's about 25 of us worldwide. We're in New York, London is our main HQ, and then Singapore as well, which is good for me. A lot of my family from Singapore. We are culture specialists, and actually Mike and I worked at Interbrand together. So my background is as a brand strategist, but about even 15 or so years ago, started to see the connection between brand and culture. And I have to admit to you that when we founded PeopleMade, we were banging the drum. And actually, there were only certain brands at that point that really took culture and employer brand very, very seriously. So at the beginning, it was Virgin, a very, very famous kind of red culture, I guess. And then Stella McCartney was our other kind of founding client at the time, who had very strong kind of vegan principles and so on. And yeah, very pleased to say that everything has really shifted and changed. And of course, culture is not only an imperative at the boardroom, but it's something that's, there's legislation around it now, which there wasn't 11 years ago. It's a very interesting time to be in culture, is the last thing I wanted to say. Post-COVID, I think that there's never been a more, I keep saying disruptive because that, but it shouldn't be seen as negative. There's a lot of opportunity around culture. So whenever we look at different ways of working, the patterns of behavior around society and how we're kind of changing, the consumer piece is kind of reinforcing changes in the cultural side internally, and likewise the internal culture space and the employer brand is then starting to shift and change how we see kind of brands on the outside. There's a bit of a show-off slide. Just the only point I wanted to make here is that we've worked with really big global organizations, and by that, AstraZeneca and Meta and others that are vast. And so part of the challenge is just getting frameworks in place and understanding how to activate and embed, all the way through to smaller setups where, I mentioned, kind of Stella McCartney and others, that are smaller groups of employees, but are really big brands. So you actually have a very different kind of dynamic that you have to understand there, and very competitive set of talent competitors. So many different learnings to share. But I think the question we should probably start with in 3 different chapters is, what is an employer brand? And I know that Richard kind of touched on this before. I think in very short layman's terms, I'd say it's about making and keeping promises. So if there's one thing to take away, what we're talking about here is promise. And the making and keeping are very significant, because where most employer brands go wrong is that they make a promise they can't keep. And so really we're in the business of understanding how to manage expectations and make the right promises so that then we can deliver on them. So clients might come to us and say, we've got an incredible culture. You go, oh, that's incredible, that's great. What promise are you making? And where does that kind of land up? Because you could have a great culture, a wonderful way of working, But if you're over-promising, you're still going to end up with a bad employer brand. The reverse is true. If you go in and you're very kind of humble and very kind of, spot on about your kind of employer brand and what you're offering, but then you over-deliver, you're going to really excel. So I think actually this expectation management piece is something that I'd love to leave with you. So the argument I want to make is that employer brand is obviously the outcome. For us, we see that as the end result. So a lot of people talk about employer brand. It's actually more helpful to think about these two aspects on the left. So culture is the behaviors, the principles, and that's really where the brand expertise comes in. So we always think of ourselves as brand people doing culture work. And why I say brand is because every culture is unique and different. And it depends on your business strategy and what you're trying to do, the kind of culture you need. So let me give you an example of a tech company that says, we're going to go for crazy growth, but in order to do that, we have to take risks and innovate. You've got to attract the right kind of people that are going to want to do that and build a culture of innovation. That's all in here. The next step then goes, well, what's the promise we're making? What's the EVP, the employee value proposition? So that becomes the proposition around the give and the get. Here's what we're going to give you. When you come here, yep, all the perks and things of the past that used to be so important. But more importantly, this is how you're going to get treated. This is the freedom you're allowed. This is the ownership. These are all the different aspects. So we're not just talking about benefits anymore. We're actually talking about the wider kind of why are you here? What's the purpose, the kind of the reason behind it? What are the values that we share? What kind of colleagues are you going to be working with? How are our leaders going to show up? What kind of decision making are you going to see? So that's all in there. And then you have an expectation in return. But we need this from you. So if you come and work here, you have to do these things. And that's where you can get into a bit of a duality. Far too much, when we land into new clients, we see that there's very much a sell approach. Here's everything we're going to give you, without enough of and this is what we expect in return. And all of that then, if you do that, arrives at a really clear promise that delivers on the business strategy, the culture that's needed, all of those different aspects. And then ultimately, because you've kept the promise, you're delivering performance, but you're also delivering on your employer brand. You get higher and higher up these rankings. In terms of sharing some of the measures and the impact, I won't dwell on this too long. And actually, it looks like, can I click this and see if the last one's turned up? There we go. 3 different ways to look at this. And I'm conscious as well that the index, I believe, you focus quite a lot on the candidate stuff because you're essentially looking at how talent views the organization. So in that area, employer review ranking, recall awareness, top of mind, all these things you might expect, number of applicants, social media engagement. There's lots of different measures that you can have in that space. When you then get into the colleague space though, of course you're looking at retention and attrition, you're looking at employee engagement and so on. But I would draw your attention beyond the bottom line into the top line. What about growth, performance, innovation? So this is where the majority of our work comes in. We don't often get employed by clients to reduce cost. We get employed because they want to grow, because they want to have specific kind of culture, and it's all top line. It's about innovation or changing or shifting patterns of working and mindset. So they might need the business to run quicker. They might need more risk-taking in certain areas. They might need more collaboration across different regions. So that all equals a number of different things in the colleague space. And then lastly, obviously there's an impact as well on brand. Brand ranking, brand awareness, brand differentiation, etc. And service experience, NPS, so we work a lot with IHG, Intercontinental and so on. And there are elements of how all of this stuff here then has such a big impact in retail sector and hospitality around your service experience and kind of how that's viewed and the delivery of it. 3 then bits that come off that, and I guess the key question is, what do you need it to do? So it's fine to say, yes, we're high in the rankings, but every time we start a new kind of project or partnership, we ask our clients, well, what do you need your employer brand to do? And there are 3 kind of key ways that I guess we see this. So to share these different scenarios. On the one hand, we call it the rocket ship. There's growth and scale. So in a moment, I'll just talk a bit about Peloton, but we worked with Peloton during the kind of COVID years, and it was incredible, the scale of hiring, the scale of growth, different regions, different markets. So in that world, you need to rapidly attract the best talent. you can get very granular in your employer brand in this world, in this scenario, because you're saying, who are we up against? Talent competitors. Are we competitive or not? How do we capture the best talent? And actually, it's moving so fast there that you want to lock down your culture so the wheels don't fall off. You know, it's very, very important. You could be doubling the size of the business, so you're effectively creating a whole new business if you get it wrong. So what you've got that's very special could all be eroded in a year, you know, in some instances. So that's why culture's important there. Clarity and alignment, this is usually those bigger global plays. So if you think of the likes of AstraZeneca or Meta or others, and more often than not, this is where regional and department tailoring is happening. And so understanding how to build clarity and alignment at a global level is key. How do we have something of an umbrella above everybody, but then still allow that kind of tailoring underneath? And then the last one is this kind of direction turnaround. And it need not always be negative. We always say to clients, it's not necessarily, you know, big redundancies and so on, although we do get involved with a lot of clients that have come through difficult times and are restructuring or turning around. This could be a new CEO, new direction, completely different kind of very positive take on the brand. So just thank you again, appreciate it.
When Jack Welch was the CEO of GE,
yes,
he famously introduced a policy of, I don't know, every year line managers had to identify the A, B and C people, and it was like 25% in the A, 50 in the B, 25 in the C. And if you were in the C, you were automatically fired. Mm. And they did that for year after year after year after year. And apparently in the end it created a very toxic culture because everyone was desperate not to be in the C's. And everyone said, well, everyone's good. You know, they've got rid of all the bad people, only good people are here. But in a fairly crude way, he was making the point that a firm is only as good and dynamic as the quality of the people that are in it. Now, if you think about any organization, you tend to hire people on brains, experience, you know, capability of doing the job. And what you've been talking about, culture, increasingly, you know, when you go to companies, you can almost just see that some people have got a completely different cultural vibe from other people. Mm. You know, like they're inherently conservative or verbose or, you know, buck passing or whatever it might be. You can see instantly that they are damaging and destroying the employer they work for and should be got rid of. But frequently they aren't. So how many companies do you think have, you know, have processes for actually quality controlling the people who make them up?
Yes.
In a way which, you know, isn't crude like GE, but does make sure that you maintain the standard?
So I will answer that one, but just quickly on the GE point before I get into the answer. I do have a point of view, a strong bias, but a point of view on GE, and actually while we're in the city, Goldman Sachs and so on. As long as there are some red lines around culture, so for example, I would want to see an equitable and fair performance process, one that, you know, supports women in leadership, for example, and isn't biased towards a certain kind of group or anything like that. So there are some red lines around culture, but within that box, I would say that as long as you're clear on your culture and you're making that promise, you're super clear. So, hey, this is what it's like to work here. At the end of every year, low performers are kind of let go. There are many people who will say, that's brilliant. That's exactly the environment I flourish in. I want to be in that environment. I will openly be a part of that and so on. It might not be for all of us. This is where it gets subjective, right? But that promise is clear. And the argument around the EVP and the employer brand is it's pretty clear and exactly what you're getting. So it could be seen as a strong EVP, actually, that, even if it's not to everyone's taste. The second part, to answer your question directly, when you have the culture model, the behaviors and the values provide a really strong cultural compass. So you can embed that into performance. And I'll give you a good example of that. We've done some work before with some clients where we take one of those aspects, one of those values that are broken down into different bubbles. And we have something called the Goldilocks framework. So we say, oh look, the porridge is just right, porridge is too hot, porridge is too cold. So you take that and you go, we went too far then. You know, actually, this is an example of where we way too hot, way too much, too heavy. This is an example we didn't go far enough with that. you know, we didn't get it right, and so on. And then here, great stories and examples of where we got it spot on for us. So it should be less of a tell and more of a storytelling, iterative, in beta, kind of understanding our culture. So it kind of starts to involve everyone in the culture in the creation of it. Does that make sense? So.
Yeah, I think I'm looking at it in a more hard-nosed kind of a way, frankly. You know, like, how many companies are actually doing this culling and doing it as a conscious thing? And is it really a good thing if they do? Because, you know, for example, when you look at employer relationships, if you, for example, make someone redundant and say, I'm making you redundant, I don't think you can really use culture as the reason for doing it, even though actually it's a very important thing. You're not allowed to do that.
In terms of Intel's another good example. They actually had it built into employees' measurement at their appraisals was, do you adhere to the ideals of and the brand ideals of Intel? And people, David Mitchell, who we used to work with, he would say that people would get let go if they didn't meet those brand standards. So I do think that it does happen. It's probably more prevalent in the US, where it's easier to let go of people because I'm, you know, putting someone through that process in a place with quite stringent employment laws might be quite difficult.
I think what we're talking about here in simple terms is the what and the how. So in terms of performance, what have you achieved? So you've done brilliantly well, etc., high performer. But then how have you achieved that? You know, in terms of the values play. And this is the question every company or organization's going to have to ask itself, which one's more important to me? So there'll be some that will say, I value performance over culture. And there are others that say, even if you're a high performer, I need the cultural piece to be there. And that's a non-negotiable. So they are culture-led, values-led organizations. And I think there's quite a lot of data to show that values-led and culture-led kind of employers and brands do very well with consumers and with top talent. So there's plenty there to be able to suggest that that's a fruitful way forward.
That one question does it, and we're on to the next.
Yeah, we're done.
Yeah, thanks very much. That was very interesting, and I think the GE thing is Six Sigma thinking, and it's something like the bottom 17%, and some companies do adhere to it, and that is just seen as a good business practice, apparently. But I guess it's different.
I think to close that off, you know, I just really urge you to kind of look at the employer brand from your own brand perspective. That's really the point I'm trying to make. The differentiation piece is crucial. Once it becomes too homogenous, it's actually really difficult to compete in that space. So inject as much of your own brand and your values and so on into the employer brand as possible and the culture, and you can't go far wrong because you'll be able to be very distinct in the marketplace. Thank you.